At 3:17 Zulu time, the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln detected an anomaly. A picture like this had never been seen before on the radar screens of the United States Navy. The AN/SPY-6 phased array radar was operating at maximum capacity. It was conducting a full 360-degree sweep and began registering contacts at an unprecedented rate. The automated target tracking algorithms were immediately overwhelmed. In just 9 seconds, the system classified 147 distinct airborne targets. 22 seconds later, that number tripled. By the 4-5 second mark, the radar picture resembled a solid wall of red tracks. They were flooding the screen from the northeast. The tactical action officer broadcasted a short message over the ship's internal network. It instantly pushed the entire carrier strike group into a state of full combat readiness. Over 1,000 inbound targets had been detected. The attack had begun. The attacking force had launched the largest drone swarm in the history of warfare. All of these platforms were converging on a single point in the Persian Gulf. The target was the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, hull number CVN-72. The lives of 6,000 sailors depended on the actions taken over the next 14 minutes. The swarm was launched from 17 different locations across western Iran. It was a coordinated volley that military analysts had been modeling for years. However, few truly believed it could be executed on such a massive scale. Intelligence later confirmed the composition of the strike package. It included over 600 delta-wing Shahed-136 loitering munitions. Each drone carried an 8-pound warhead and cruised at roughly 115 miles per hour. Woven into this wave were 240 faster Mohajer-6 platforms armed with precision-guided munitions. The remaining 160 Ababil series drones were used as electronic warfare decoys. Their warheads had been replaced with radar reflectors and infrared emitters. They were designed to disorient and blind the strike group's defensive sensors. The total cost of the entire swarm was estimated at less than $110 million. The cost of the ship being targeted was $13.6 billion. The mathematics of attrition were terrifying. This was exactly the asymmetric calculus that Iranian strategists had been perfecting for over a decade. Inside the USS Abraham Lincoln's Combat Information Center, the atmosphere instantly shifted from controlled readiness to critical tension. Dozens of operators watched their screens fill with hostile tracks. Every target had a velocity vector and a calculated point of impact. All of them converged on the exact same coordinates. The Aegis Combat System immediately transitioned into its automatic special mode. This is the most complex naval air defense architecture ever created. This configuration allows the system's computers to engage threats without waiting for human operator authorization for each individual target. The commanding officer of the guided missile cruiser USS Philippine Sea, positioned 12 nautical miles off the carrier's starboard beam, issued the weapons release order. The authorization applied across the strike group's entire air defense zone. The vertical launch system cells across 5 warships began to burst open. The first SM-6 surface-to-air missile cleared its cell on the USS Philippine Sea at exactly 3:18 and 22 seconds. It accelerated to Mach 3.5, tearing into the pre-dawn sky. 7 seconds later, 3 more followed. Within 60 seconds, the strike group launched 42 interceptor missiles at the incoming swarm. Each SM-6 missile cost roughly $4.8 million. The first minute of defense alone cost over $200 million in expended ordnance. The outer defensive layer performed exactly as designed. The standard family of missiles engaged the leading edge of the swarm at ranges between 40 and 70 nautical miles. Their high-explosive fragmentation warheads shredded the chassis of the Shahed drones, sending debris tumbling into the waters of the Gulf. The Aegis system tracked every single intercept and confirmed the target kills. Surviving interceptors instantly reassigned themselves to the next highest priority threats. In the first 3 minutes of the battle, 68 drones were destroyed. However, the entire concept of a swarm attack inherently assumes a massive attrition rate. For every drone that was blown out of the sky, 9 more kept flying. Their cheap autopilots maintained their course with mechanical indifference to the carnage around them. The electronic warfare decoys were successfully doing their job. They were generating hundreds of false radar returns. This forced the Aegis system to burn processing power, trying to discriminate between real and phantom threats. The radar picture was degrading, tracking accuracy was dropping, and the swarm kept getting closer. At the 30 nautical mile mark, RIM 162 ESSM missiles entered the fight. These shorter-range interceptors were launched directly from the carrier and the destroyer USS Spruance. Their semi-active radar homing heads locked onto individual drones with deadly precision. Confirmation of another 41 splashed targets quickly followed. Every intercept was a micro-victory that barely dented the sheer mass of the incoming wave. The defensive kill chains were functioning, but the target volume was simply overwhelming. Ordnance depletion warnings began flashing on the command screens. The cruiser USS Philippine Sea had already burned through 60% of its SM-6 inventory. The destroyer USS Spruance was down to just 38 ESSMs. Every ship in the strike group was expending interceptors at a rate that would drain their combined magazines in under 7 minutes. Meanwhile, over 700 drones were still pushing inbound. They were crossing into the 20-mile ring. At this range, intercept geometry starts to break down, and close-in weapon systems have to take over. The Phalanx CIWS mounts were activated across the entire formation. Their 6-barreled Gatling guns spun up to a maximum rate of 4,500 rounds per minute. The iconic buzzsaw roar of the guns echoed across the water. Armor-piercing tungsten rounds shredded the approaching drones at ranges of less than 2 nautical miles. The system was designed as the absolute last line of defense. It acts as the goalkeeper, stopping whatever slipped past the outer layers. The weapon systems began slaughtering targets with brutal efficiency. The Shahed-136 drones disintegrated under the concentrated fire. Their composite airframes shattered into fragments that ricocheted off the ship's hulls and rained down into the churning sea. However, the CIWS has a critical limitation. The magazine capacity of each mount is only 1,550 rounds. At maximum rate of fire, a magazine is empty in about 20 seconds. Reloading requires manual intervention and takes several minutes. In the context of this battle, those minutes did not exist. When the last round left the first Phalanx mount on the carrier's starboard side, there were still 412 drones inside the 10-mile perimeter. The defensive perimeter was buckling. Every layer of defense had operated at or beyond its design parameters. That applied to the long-range missiles, medium-range interceptors, and close-in weapon systems. But it simply wasn't enough. The very concept of the swarm attack was built from the ground up to oversaturate defense systems. The goal was to overload sensors, deplete magazines, and exploit a fundamental economic imbalance. A $50,000 drone was being pitted against a $5 million interceptor. In the Combat Information Center, damage projections began flashing on the main tactical display. The system calculated that, given the current intercept rates and remaining ordnance, between 80 and 120 drones would hit the strike group. Even a fraction of that number, carrying 8-pound warheads, could put the aircraft carrier out of action. The flight deck, catapults, arresting gear, and the island superstructure were completely vulnerable to massed drone impacts. The threat became very real that the USS Abraham Lincoln would be the first American aircraft carrier to sustain battle damage since World War II. Then came the order that changed the course of events. From the flag bridge, the strike group commander transmitted an encrypted command. It activated a system that most of the crew didn't even know existed. Mounted on the carrier's island, hidden beneath a radome, was the AN/SEQ-3 laser weapon system. From the outside, it looked like a standard communications antenna. It was a 150-kilowatt solid-state directed energy weapon. The system had been covertly installed during the carrier's last refit. It had undergone extensive testing at the White Sands missile range and aboard the USS Portland during classified Pacific deployments. Until this moment, it had never been fired in anger. The weapon required no physical ordnance, no magazines, and no reload cycles. It drew its power directly from the carrier's twin nuclear reactors. Together, they generated enough electricity to power a small city. As long as the reactors were critical, The laser could fire continuously. The first beam shot out at the speed of light. It was an invisible pillar of focused photons in the near-infrared spectrum. It struck the closest Shahed-136 drone at a distance of 3 nautical miles. The effect lacked the dramatic spectacle of a missile intercept. There was no explosion, no fireball, no shockwave. Instead, the drone's composite fuselage simply began to glow at the point of contact. Then, it deformed. A wing sheared off from the chassis as the structural adhesives flash vaporized at over 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The drone tumbled into the sea in 2 pieces, leaving a trail of smoke. The entire kill process took exactly 1.7 seconds. Before the wreckage even hit the water, the laser had already slewed to the next target and begun burning through its hull. The second kill took 1.4 seconds. The third took 1.1 seconds. The system's tracking algorithms were optimizing in real time. The directed energy weapon carved through the swarm with an inevitability that no kinetic system could match. It didn't need to lead its targets. It didn't need to calculate intercept geometry. There was no need to account for windage or target maneuvering. The beam traveled at the speed of light and hit exactly where the tracking system pointed. In 4 minutes, the ANSEQ-3 laser system obliterated 97 drones. It snapped between targets with absolute, mechanical precision. It turned a mass saturation attack into a methodical turkey shoot. The cost of each intercept was estimated at roughly $12. That was the price of the diesel fuel consumed by the ship's auxiliary power generation systems. That number was practically zero compared to the $4.8 million for an interceptor missile. It was a total inversion of the economic calculus that made the drone swarm strategy viable in the first place. The attacking force had spent $110 million to build the swarm. The laser was erasing it for the price of a fast food meal per kill. But the battle was not over yet. Just as the laser was systematically wiping out the remnants of the first wave, the carrier's electronic warfare suite detected new signatures. They sent a spike of pure dread through every operator in the Combat Information Center. 6 objects were launching from pads deep inside enemy territory. They were moving at velocities exponentially faster than the drones. The system classified them as targets on a ballistic trajectory, entering the terminal phase of hypersonic flight. The drones were just the first echelon of the attack. They served as an oversaturation screen, designed entirely to exhaust the strike group's defenses. Their objective was to drag every sensor down to focus on low-speed, low-altitude threats. Trailing right behind them were the actual heavy hitters, 6 Fatah, 2 hypersonic ballistic missiles. Each was moving at Mach 8. Each carried a maneuvering re-entry vehicle, purpose-built to defeat terminal ballistic missile defenses. They were diving on the carrier from the upper atmosphere. Time to impact was 93 seconds. Hypersonic weapons represent the single gravest threat to surface naval forces in the modern era. At Mach 8, these missiles transit the air defense envelope so fast that traditional interceptors simply cannot pull the required lateral Gs to secure a kinetic kill. The maneuvering warhead on the Fatah, too, compounded the problem. It executed unpredictable trajectory shifts during its terminal dive. The re-entry vehicle rode down a corridor of possible impact points, widening and narrowing with every maneuver. The Aegis system, already redlining from the drone assault, attempted to calculate firing solutions for the hypersonic targets. The computers spit out a probability of intercept of less than 15% per missile. This meant that even if the strike group ripple-fired every remaining SM-6, the statistical probability of stopping all 6 warheads was virtually zero. The capabilities of the standard missile family had been maxed out. Directed energy weapons couldn't solve this problem, either. The laser had successfully slaughtered the slow-moving drone swarm, but hypersonic missiles presented an entirely different targeting geometry. At Mach 8, the weapon would transit the laser's effective engagement envelope in a fraction of a second. The beam dwell time required to burn through the missile's armored nose cone was measured in seconds. This far exceeded the momentary flashes needed to melt through the composite shells of the drones. The laser could scorch, but not destroy, the hypersonic re-entry vehicle in the time available. The strike group needed a different weapon, and they had exactly that in their arsenal. Aboard the destroyer USS Zumwalt, operating 40 nautical miles west of the carrier, sat an experimental weapon system. Compared to this, the laser looked like a conventional gun. The ANHM-1 high-power microwave emitter operated in the gigahertz range. This directed energy microwave weapon was built specifically for this exact scenario. It didn't need to physically destroy the target. There was no need to melt through armor or vaporize structural components. Instead, the mount projected a focused cone of electromagnetic energy. It penetrated right through the missile's skin, inducing catastrophic voltage spikes across every electronic circuit inside the weapon. Navigation systems, guidance computers, inertial measurement units, fusing mechanisms. All of it was hopelessly vulnerable to the invisible pulse of energy. It traveled at the speed of light and required zero physical contact with the target. The Zumwalt's integrated power system generated 78 megawatts of electricity from its advanced gas turbine generators. It fed the microwave emitter, which generated a continuous pulse. It swept across the incoming missile trajectories like an invisible floodlight. The first Fatah, 2 lost target lock at an altitude of 40,000 feet. Its maneuvering warhead suddenly went totally blind. Every semiconductor in its guidance suite fried simultaneously. The weapon reverted to a dumb ballistic trajectory and plunged into the ocean 3 nautical miles from the nearest ship. The second and third missiles suffered the exact same fate just seconds apart. Their electronic nervous systems were bricked by microwave energy. They were never shielded to withstand. The fourth missile's warhead detonated prematurely at altitude. Its fusing circuit received a false trigger from a massive voltage spike in the wiring. There was a brilliant flash high above the fleet, momentarily illuminating the pre-dawn sky. The fifth missile was hit simultaneously by the microwave weapon and a final volley of SM-6 interceptors. The combination of an electronic kill and a kinetic impact turned it into a cloud of shrapnel. It was scattered across a square mile of ocean. The sixth missile, the last of the hypersonic threats, broke through closer than any of the others. Its hardened electronics resisted the microwave pulse for a few critical, agonizing seconds. It reached an altitude of 12,000 feet before the sustained microwave barrage finally overwhelmed its shielding. The re-entry vehicle tumbled out of control and slammed into the water less than 800 yards from the hull of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The geyser from the impact rose higher than the carrier's flight deck, but it was a miss. The ship was unharmed. In the sudden silence, the Combat Information Center slowly transitioned from maximum adrenaline to the jarring realization of survival. The screens, which just moments ago had been saturated with hundreds of hostile tracks, now showed empty ocean and the faint returns of floating debris. The battle had lasted 18 minutes and 41 seconds from first detection to final splashdown. In that time, the strike group expended 114 Standard Family missiles and 87 ESSMs. More than 23,000 rounds were fired from the CIWS mounts. The directed energy laser was triggered over 340 times. The experimental microwave weapon was deployed against 6 hypersonic targets. The total drone body count exceeded 960 units. All 6 hypersonic missiles were neutralized. Not a single ship in the strike group sustained damage. There were 0 U.S. casualties. The defensive systems had withstood the most massive aerial assault ever directed at a naval formation. But the true ramifications of this battle extended far beyond a mere tactical victory. In command centers across the globe, analysts would spend months dissecting every single second of this engagement. The conclusions they draw will alter military strategy for decades to come. The drone swarm attack proved that overwhelming numbers can oversaturate even the most advanced kinetic defense systems. The economic asymmetry was real and undeniable. A nation spending tens of millions could force a carrier strike group to burn through billions in defensive ordnance in a matter of minutes. However, directed energy weapons completely shattered that equation just as decisively. A laser capable of incinerating a drone for $12 nullified every economic advantage the swarm possessed. The rules of the game changed, and then changed again, all within the span of 18 minutes. The question now haunting military planners was simple. How will the situation unfold when the next swarm numbers, not 1,000, but 10,000 units? What happens when the drones are equipped with their own electronic warfare suites capable of blinding a laser's targeting optics? And what are the consequences when hypersonic missiles aren't fired in salvos of 6, but in massive, overwhelming waves? If you want to understand the weapons and tactics defining the future of global warfare, hit subscribe and stay ahead of the curve.